The emergency operator's voice crackled through the phone, steady and professional. 911, what's your emergency? A woman's voice responded, dripping with self-importance. Yes, there's a suspicious car parked in my neighborhood. It's in someone's driveway, and it's been there for hours. The dispatcher paused. Ma'am, whose driveway is it? The woman scoffed. That doesn't matter. Just send the cops. The scene cut to me, standing in my driveway, sipping a cup of coffee, watching my kids play in the yard. As I heard the distant wail of sirens, my phone buzzed. City Hall, probably calling about some new ordinance. I ignored it for now. I had no idea I was about to be the center of an absurd HOA power struggle that would escalate far beyond what anyone expected. The police car rolled up, lights flashing, but no sirens. Two officers stepped out, looking confused as they glanced at the scene. A man in a suit drinking coffee in a well-maintained home. Definitely not the crime scene they were expecting. One officer approached, hand resting lightly on his belt. Sir, he asked, are you aware that someone reported a suspicious vehicle parked here? I chuckled, setting my cup down on the patio table. You mean my car? The one in my driveway? Before the officer could respond, an all-too-familiar voice shrieked from across the street. That's him. That's the car. He's violating HOA rules. I sighed, already regretting not taking a different route home today. Linda, the self-appointed queen of our suburban neighborhood, marched up with her clipboard clutched in her manicured hands like it was the Constitution. She was in her mid-50s, with a blonde bob too perfect to be natural, and wearing a pastel cardigan over a t-shirt that read, HOA, keeping communities safe. The officers turned, visibly suppressing a groan. This wasn't their first Linda encounter. Linda jabbed a finger at my car, her expression twisted with righteous fury. He's breaking community rules. Article 14, Section 3 states that no vehicles may be parked in a driveway overnight unless approved by the HOA board. The officers exchanged glances, clearly uninterested. Ma'am, this is his private property, one of them said. Linda huffed. And this is our community. If we let one person break the rules, what's next? Abandoned cars? Junkyards? This neighborhood has standards. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Linda, I live here. This is my driveway. My garage is full, so I parked here overnight. That's not a crime. It's an infraction, she shot back. And infractions lead to fines. The second officer, an older guy who looked like he'd seen it all, crossed his arms. Ma'am, we enforce the law, not HOA rules. Do you want to report a crime, or are we done here? Linda's lips thinned, and for the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. But she wasn't backing down that easily. Well, if you won't enforce it, I'll escalate it to the HOA board. You'll be fined, and if you don't pay, we will tow your car. The officers, clearly having had enough, nodded toward me. You good, sir? I smirked. Better than ever. They left without another word, leaving me alone with Linda, who was still fuming. This is a serious matter, she snapped. You may think you're special, but the rules apply to everyone. I sighed, deciding to drop the bombshell. Linda, do you even know who I am? Her eyes narrowed. You're just another entitled homeowner who thinks he's above the rules. I pulled out my wallet and casually flipped it open, revealing my ID. Actually, Linda, I'm the mayor. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, then shut it again, processing the information like a dial-up modem struggling to load a web page. That's impossible, she finally sputtered. Why would the mayor live in this neighborhood? I shrugged. It's a nice area. Well, it was until you started making it a full-time dictatorship. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She recovered quickly, though, crossing her arms. That doesn't change anything. You still have to follow the rules. I smiled. Oh, I plan to. But Linda, you just made a huge mistake. And with that, I walked back into my house, already planning my next move. Linda stood frozen in my driveway, her jaw tightening as she processed what I had just told her. The revelation that I was the mayor had hit her like a ton of bricks. But knowing Linda, I expected her to recover fast, and I was right. Her nose wrinkled as she scoffed. Being mayor doesn't exempt you from HOA rules. I let out a slow breath, doing my best to keep my patience intact. Linda, let me explain this in a way you'll understand. My driveway is on private property. That means HOA rules can't override city ordinances. And as it so happens, I oversee those ordinances. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she struggled to counter my logic. Her mouth pressed into a thin line before she fired back. Well, if you won't listen to the HOA rules, then I'll take this to someone who will. And with that, she turned on her heel and marched off toward her house. I knew exactly what was coming next. Linda had just escalated the situation to her ultimate fallback plan, dragging the HOA president into this mess. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, she was back, and this time, she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Tom, the HOA president, a tired-looking man in his late 40s who had clearly been roped into more HOA disputes than he cared to count. His shoulders slumped as he approached, already exasperated. I greeted him with a polite nod. Tom, he sighed. Hey, Mr. Mayor. Linda folded her arms, standing beside him like an eager prosecutor waiting to present her case. Tom, you tell him. He's violating Article 14, Section 3. If we don't enforce this, what kind of example does that set? Tom pinched the bridge of his nose before looking at me with a weary expression. Look, I don't want to make this a whole thing, but technically, the HOA does have a rule about driveway parking. I raised a brow. Tom, do you actually enforce that rule? Tom hesitated, avoiding eye contact. Oh well, Linda does. I smirked. Right. And how many people have actually paid the fine she's handed out? Silence. Linda shot Tom a glare. That's not the point. The point is that he is breaking a rule, and if he doesn't pay, we can tow his car. I chuckled. Oh, you think you can tow my car? I'd love to see you try. Linda's smug expression faltered. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. Let's get something straight. The HOA is a private association, not law enforcement. You don't have the legal authority to tow anything from my property. If you attempt to do so, you'll be committing trespassing and grand theft auto. Tom's eyes widened slightly, and Linda's face turned red. You can't just make up legal threats, she sputtered. I smiled. You think I'm making it up? I'd be happy to have the city attorney explain it to you in court. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew she was losing, but she wasn't about to back down yet. Instead, she went for the nuclear option. Well, then, she said, straightening up, I'll just fine you. I raised a brow. Excuse me. If you refuse to follow the rules, you'll be receiving a formal fine from the HOA, she said, her voice dripping with confidence. And if you don't pay it, we'll put a lien on your property. Tom immediately shifted uncomfortably beside her. Linda, I don't know if we should. Linda waved him off. No, we can do this. I've seen it done before. He doesn't get special treatment just because he's the mayor. I sighed, shaking my head. All right, Linda. Let's see where this goes. The next morning, I got an envelope in the mail. Sure enough, it was a formal notice from the HOA, signed by Linda herself, stating that I had been fined $250 for unauthorized parking in the driveway. I laughed as I read it. She was really trying to play hardball. Fine. If she wanted to play, I'd play. That afternoon, I walked over to Tom's house, knocking on the door. He answered hesitantly, clearly knowing why I was there. Tom, I said with a polite smile, let's talk. I held up the fine. Linda really thinks she can put a lien on my house over this. Tom rubbed the back of his neck. Look, man, she's a lot, okay? And technically, HOA rules can lead to fines, but, I don't think we've ever actually followed through on putting a lien on anyone. I smirked. That's because you can't. HOA rules don't override city laws, and you definitely can't file a lien over an unenforceable rule. That's not how it works. Tom sighed. I figured as much. You know this is going to end badly for her, right? I continued. Tom, how many times has she done something like this? He was silent for a long moment before muttering, too many. I gave him a knowing look. Then maybe it's time we do something about it. Tom glanced over his shoulder toward Linda's house, where she was undoubtedly scheming her next move. Then he let out a long breath. I'll call an emergency board meeting. I smiled. Now that's the kind of decision-making I like to see. That evening, the entire HOA board gathered in the community clubhouse. Linda, of course, was furious that the meeting had been called without her approval. I demand to know why we're here, she snapped, standing at the front of the room, arms crossed. Tom cleared his throat. We need to discuss recent events regarding HOA rule enforcement. Linda's eyes narrowed. You mean his blatant disregard for the rules? I leaned back in my chair, watching the show. No, Linda, Tom said. We're here to discuss your actions. Linda stiffened. What? My actions? Tom pulled out a folder. Over the past years, you've issued 147 fines, attempted to tow 8 vehicles, and have called the police on at least 10 occasions over petty HOA infractions. Linda's face turned red. That's because I care about this community. Tom ignored her outburst. And let's not forget that you tried to put a lien on the mayor's house, which, if actually attempted, could have landed the HOA in a legal nightmare. Linda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Tom looked at the rest of the board. I think it's time we vote on whether Linda should remain in a position of authority. Linda gasped. You can't do that. Tom gave her a flat look. Actually, we can. I watched with satisfaction as the board members exchanged glances, then began raising their hands one by one. Linda's reign of terror was about to crumble. Linda stormed out of the emergency HOA meeting with her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was livid. Her usual smug demeanor had cracked under the weight of the board's decision to remove her from her position. But if I knew anything about Linda, it was that she wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. The next morning, I woke up to find another envelope in my mailbox, this one certified, delivered via courier. I smirked. Linda was doubling down. I opened it and let out a laugh. Inside was a second fine from the HOA, this time for $500, citing multiple infractions, including repeated unauthorized driveway parking, failure to maintain visual harmony with the community, and this one made me laugh so hard I had to set my coffee down, disrespecting HOA authority. Linda had lost her official power, but she wasn't giving up. If she couldn't use the board to get to me, she'd find another way. I checked my phone and saw a text from Tom. Tom, hey man, I didn't approve that fine. Linda's been rallying the other board members behind your back. I raised an eyebrow. She wasn't just coming after me. She was trying to take back control. I sent a quick response. Me, she's desperate. Let's shut this down for good. I had planned to enjoy a peaceful Saturday, but Linda had other ideas. I walked outside, coffee in hand, and wasn't surprised to find her standing at the end of my driveway, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She was speaking in hushed, furious tones. When she saw me, she ended the call and plastered on a fake smile. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, she said. I took a sip of coffee. Linda, bold move sending another fine after last night. She grinned, but there was venom behind it. Oh, that wasn't me. That was the newly restructured HOA board. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the board that voted you out? Linda's smile twitched. Some of them still understand the importance of order in this community. And I may not be on the board officially, but I still have influence. I nodded, setting my mug down. I see. And you think that influence gives you the right to harass homeowners? Linda's eyes flickered, but she kept her composure. I don't harass anyone. I enforce standards. I crossed my arms. Linda, you've called the cops on me, tried to have my car towed, and now you're handing out fake fines. At what point do you admit you're just grasping at straws? Her face flushed, but before she could answer, Tom appeared from the sidewalk, jogging over. He looked like he'd been dealing with HOA nonsense all morning. Linda, he sighed, we need to talk. Linda flipped through her clipboard. Oh, I agree, Tom. We need to talk about why you're letting this man undermine everything we've built. Tom's eyes twitched. Linda, we didn't approve that second fine. You went behind the board's back. Linda's jaw tightened. I consulted with the right people. Tom crossed his arms. No, you bullied a few nervous board members into signing something. That's not how this works. Linda huffed. You're all making a huge mistake. Letting him. She jabbed a finger at me. Get away with breaking rules means anyone can. If we don't hold the line, this place will turn into a free-for-all. I smiled. Linda, you keep saying I broke the rules, but here's a fun fact. That rule isn't even enforceable. She blinked. Excuse me. Tom sighed, running a hand down his face. I told you this last night, Linda. That parking rule was written into the HOA charter 10 years ago, and the city updated zoning laws 7 years ago. The rule is void. Linda's lips parted slightly. That can't be right. I grinned. It is. which means every fine you've issued based on it is invalid. Linda took a step back, shaking her head. No, no. This neighborhood is mine. I built this. I keep it clean. I keep it safe. You don't understand what happens when people start ignoring rules. Her voice had risen, drawing attention from the other neighbors. People were peeking out of their windows, watching from porches. Tom rubbed his temples. Linda, you're making a scene. She wasn't listening anymore. Her breathing had become shallow, her face pale. And then something unexpected happened. A car pulled up beside us, a moving truck. Linda's eyes darted toward it, confusion flashing across her face. What? Then a man in a suit stepped out of the passenger side. He looked around before settling his gaze on Linda. Miss Davidson? He asked. Linda stiffened. Who's asking? The man pulled out a clipboard of his own, but unlike Linda's, this one actually mattered. I'm here on behalf of your landlord. You've been served an eviction notice. Silence. Absolute, stunning silence. I raised a brow. Landlord. Tom blinked. Wait, Linda, you don't even own this house? Linda's face drained of color. Aye. The man continued, flipping through his paperwork. It seems your landlord has grown concerned about your conduct. The repeated police complaints, neighbor disputes, and legal threats were a violation of your lease agreement. Linda let out a choked laugh. This has to be a mistake. The man shook his head. No mistake. Your landlord has revoked your rental agreement. You have 30 days to vacate. Linda's clipboard slipped from her hands. The irony was too delicious to ignore. She had spent years harassing homeowners, handing out fines, and acting like she owned the community, but she didn't even own her own home. Linda whirled to face me, her expression pure rage. This is your fault. You did this. I laughed. Linda, I had nothing to do with it. This was your doing. Tom exhaled. Wow. I did not see that coming. Linda trembled, her world collapsing around her. I'll fight this. I have rights. The man from the moving truck adjusted his tie. You do. You have 30 days to exercise them. She turned to Tom. You can't let them do this to me. Tom shrugged. Linda, I thought we couldn't ignore the rules. For the first time, Linda had no response. I picked up my coffee and took a sip. Well, this has been fun, but I've got a city to run. Best of luck, Linda. As I walked back to my house, I could hear Linda's faint, miserable wails. The HOA had tried to retaliate. Instead, Linda had evicted herself. With Linda out of the picture, at least legally, one might assume that peace would finally return to the neighborhood. But that would be giving Linda too much credit. Even with an eviction notice hanging over her head like the sword of Damocles, she refused to go quietly. She still had 30 days before she had to leave, and I had no doubt she was going to use every single one of them to make life miserable for everyone around her. But she wasn't the only one with a plan. I had decided that since Linda enjoyed playing power games, it was time to show her what it looked like when real authority stepped in. So, I made one phone call. 3 days after Linda's meltdown, I called for an emergency HOA town hall, and this time, it wasn't just the board members. Every single homeowner in the neighborhood was invited. Tom, to his credit, had finally wised up. He was done being Linda's reluctant enabler. I don't know if you realize how big of a turnout we're going to get, he warned me over the phone. I do, I replied. And that's the point. When the night of the meeting arrived, it was standing room only at the community center. The place was packed with homeowners, some curious, some angry, but all of them done with Linda's nonsense. I stood at the front of the room beside Tom, and after a few minutes of general grumbling from the crowd, I took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, scanning the room, you're all here tonight because, whether you realized it or not, you've been living under the rule of an unelected dictator. A ripple of chuckles and murmurs spread through the crowd. A few people even booed at the mere mention of Linda. She's handed out 147 fines, attempted to tow 8 vehicles, and has personally called the police on over 10 different occasions for what? Trash cans being left out too long? Driveway parking? The wrong shade of curtains. Someone from the back shouted. She fined me for having a garden gnome. Laughter erupted across the room. See, I gestured. This isn't about community standards. It's about power. Linda, who had been sitting stiffly in the audience, suddenly stood up, her face red. This is slander. I was simply enforcing the rules that this very HOA voted for. A woman near the front turned and shouted, "No one voted for you, Linda." The room erupted in applause. Linda scowled and crossed her arms. This neighborhood will fall apart without someone to maintain order. I turned toward Tom, raising a brow. How many times has Linda acted without board approval? Tom hesitated, then sighed. Too many to count. I nodded. Which brings us to tonight's motion. Effective immediately, I am proposing a full restructuring of this HOA. That means new rules, new leadership, and, most importantly, a formal vote on every future policy. The crowd cheered. Linda's eyes widened in panic. You can't do that. HOA rules can't just be overturned by some rabble-rousing mayor trying to win a popularity contest. I smirked. Linda, I don't need to win a popularity contest. I already won an election. The crowd erupted in laughter. Linda's face turned even redder. This is an outrage. This is my community. I built this. I took a slow breath. And now it's time for the people to decide if they want to keep it that way. I turned to Tom. We now take an official vote. Should the HOA be restructured, including the removal of all previous Linda-enforced policies? Tom raised his hand. I vote yes. One by one, hands shot up across the room. Linda's panic deepened as she watched dozens of homeowners vote against her. No. No. This isn't fair, she shrieked. I demand a recount. One of the elderly homeowners scoffed. Linda, this isn't a presidential election. You lost. Take it with some dignity. The final count, 97 votes in favor, 2 against. Linda had officially lost everything. After the vote, Tom took the microphone. That settles it. The new policies will go into effect immediately. All past, unissued fines are officially voided. The room erupted in cheers. Linda, shaking with fury, turned to me, eyes burning. You think this is over? You think you've won? I'll take this to court. I smiled. Go ahead. I'd love to see a judge's reaction when you try to sue for your total control of a neighborhood you don't even own property in. Linda flinched, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. She had no power, no support, and nowhere to go. And for the first time since this entire ordeal started, she finally knew it. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the door, muttering under her breath, "This neighborhood is doomed without me." As she reached the exit, one of the neighbors cranked up a Bluetooth speaker and blasted "Hit the Road, Jack." The entire room burst into laughter. Linda's face twisted in humiliation, and she stomped out of the building for good. With Linda gone, the mood in the community immediately lifted. The next week, homeowners started putting out garden gnomes, parking in their driveways without fear, and even planting flowers that weren't pre-approved. Tom, relieved, admitted, I should have stopped her a long time ago. The HOA should be about helping people, not controlling them. I clapped him on the back. Welcome to the light, Tom. A month later, Linda's house had new tenants, a sweet older couple who just wanted a quiet place to live. And best of all, Linda had moved to another HOA across town. But just when I thought I'd seen the last of her, I saw a news article pop up online. Local HOA woman calls 911 on delivery truck for loitering. Turns out the driver was her new HOA president. I laughed, shaking my head. Some people never learn. And with that, peace returned to the neighborhood, for now. Epilogue, the final chapter. Linda had lost. She had been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, stripped of her self-appointed power, and served an eviction notice from a home she didn't even own. But if I had learned anything about Linda, it was that she never knew when to quit. For the next week, despite having no authority left, she went on a rampage. It started with petty revenge. One morning, I stepped outside to find my garbage cans missing. A neighbor, Sam, waved at me from across the street. You too. I frowned. What do you mean? Sam motioned toward his curb. Somebody's been taking garbage cans and hiding them. I caught a blonde woman dragging mine into the wooded area last night. I sighed. Let me guess. Wearing a cardigan and an expression of pure spite. Sam nodded. Linda was stealing trash cans. But that wasn't all. She called animal control on a family down the street, claiming their dog was a dangerous stray. The officers arrived only to find a golden retriever puppy wagging its tail. She reported a mysterious trespasser in the neighborhood, the supposed criminal, the mailman. She even filed a noise complaint because Tom's kids were playing basketball in their own driveway. It was a week of chaos. The final straw came when I caught her standing in my driveway again, holding a notepad like she was still the queen of the HOA. I walked up, arms crossed. Linda, you have zero authority here. Why are you still doing this? Linda's eye twitched. Because someone has to. This neighborhood is falling apart without proper leadership. I gestured around. Linda, people are literally happier now that you're gone. She clenched her fists. These people are too stupid to understand what's best for them. I was the only thing keeping this place from turning into a slum. I raised a brow. Linda, you don't even live here anymore. That stopped her. Her expression twisted. Reality hit her like a truck. She turned abruptly and stormed off without another word. I should have known she wasn't done. That night, Tom called me, his voice tense. You're not going to believe what Linda just did. I sat up. What now? She's suing the HOA. I nearly choked on my drink. She's what? Tom sighed. She just filed a lawsuit against the HOA, claiming her removal was illegal and that she was the victim of unlawful discrimination. I burst out laughing. Tom, she is no case. She doesn't own property here. She was removed by a legal vote. There's literally nothing she can argue. Tom hesitated. Yeah, but what if she drags this out? What if we actually have to go to court? I smirked. Then we end this once and for all. 2 weeks later, we stood in small claims court. Linda sat at the plaintiff's table, her arms folded, eyes gleaming with misplaced confidence. She had 3 binders filled with evidence of her importance to the community. The judge, an older man with zero patience for nonsense, rubbed his temples as Linda ranted. Your Honor, I was the only competent leader in that neighborhood. The HOA needs me. These people have personally targeted me because I care about rules and order. This is a witch hunt. The judge sighed. Miss Davidson, you were suing an HOA that you were never a legal homeowner in. Linda's confidence faltered. Well, yes, but... The judge slammed his gavel. Case dismissed. Linda froze. What? The judge sighed. Miss Davidson, you have no legal standing in this matter. You have no ownership rights, no claim to damages, and no authority in the HOA. This is a frivolous lawsuit and a waste of the court's time. Linda's mouth opened and closed. She had prepared for a dramatic trial, a drawn-out battle of wits. Instead, she had just been laughed out of court in under 5 minutes. I couldn't resist. I turned to Tom and whispered, fastest eviction notice in history. Linda snapped. She shot to her feet, pointing an accusing finger. This isn't over. I'll take this to the news. I'll tell them how corrupt this HOA is, how they discriminated against me. The judge looked so done. Ma'am, if you don't leave my courtroom in the next 10 seconds, I will hold you in contempt of court. Linda gasped. Then she turned and bolted out of the courtroom. The moment the doors slammed behind her, the judge shook his head. People like that shouldn't be allowed in an HOA. Tom and I lost it. The day after court, Tom called me again, but this time he was laughing. You are not going to believe what just happened. Oh, this I got to hear. Tom took a deep breath. Linda just tried to run for the HOA board in her new neighborhood. I burst out laughing. You're joking. Nope. She moved into a different HOA across town and immediately tried to take control. Tom wheezed. And she got banned from all future HOA positions. I nearly dropped my phone. She what? Tom could barely get the words out. Apparently, the HOA president Googled her name and found out about everything she pulled here. He called an emergency vote and preemptively banned her from ever holding power in that community. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Linda had spent years treating herself like royalty, only to get exiled from every HOA she tried to control. With Linda gone, life in the neighborhood thrived. People parked in their driveways without fear, kids played outside again, and Tom even officially rewrote HOA policies to ensure no single person could ever pull what Linda did again. As for me, I enjoyed my Linda-free mornings, drinking coffee in my driveway with no clipboard-wielding menace to ruin my day. And sometimes, just for fun, I'd check the news, because I knew somewhere, in some other unlucky neighborhood, Linda was at it again. But this time, no one was listening. Final thoughts. The morning after Linda's courtroom disaster, the entire neighborhood felt different, lighter, freer. It was the first time in years that people weren't waking up to passive-aggressive emails, surprise HOA fines, or the threat of Linda lurking with a clipboard, ready to strike. For the first time, People actually enjoyed living here. Tom wasted no time overhauling the HOA policies. The first official act of the newly Linda-free HOA board? Voiding every fine Linda had ever issued. A collective cheer rang through the neighborhood when the announcement went out. The very next day, people started making petty rebellions just because they could. One guy put out a garden gnome army on his front lawn. A family painted their mailbox neon green just because they'd been fined for having an off-white one before. My personal favorite? Someone parked an RV in their driveway for an entire week just to celebrate the downfall of Linda. Tom laughed when he saw it. You think we should say something? I took a sip of my coffee, standing in my driveway. Nah, let them have this. It was Linda's worst nightmare, a neighborhood where people were happy and free, and she couldn't do a thing about it. Just when I thought I had seen the last of her, I got one final message. It was an email from an unknown sender, but I knew exactly who it was from. Subject: This neighborhood is doomed. Body: You think you've won, but you've only sealed this neighborhood's fate. Without rules, this place will fall into chaos. Just wait. You'll regret everything. I leaned back in my chair, chuckling. Then I hit delete. A month passed, and life continued as normal, except it was better. No more Linda, no more HOA dictatorship, no more ridiculous fines. One afternoon, I ran into Tom at the local cafe. He looked relaxed for the first time in forever. You know, he said, stirring his coffee, I actually like being on the HOA board now. That's what happens when you're not running a mini dictatorship, I said with a grin. Tom chuckled. I was thinking of writing a guide, how to remove a Linda from your HOA. I raised an eyebrow. If you write it, I'll make sure it's required reading for every HOA in the country. We laughed, knowing full well that somewhere out there, another Linda was wreaking havoc in another unsuspecting neighborhood. About 2 months after Linda was officially exiled, I got a text from Tom. Tom, check this out. You're going to love it. It was a screenshot of a news article. The headline read, HOA board member calls 911 on delivery truck, forgets the HOA president is the driver. I nearly spit out my drink. Tom, guess who? I shook my head, laughing. Linda had moved to a new HOA and immediately tried to take over. Except this time, she called the cops on the wrong guy, her new HOA president. The article detailed how Linda had attempted to enforce the rules at her new neighborhood. She saw a delivery truck parked for too long, assumed it was a violation, and called the police only to discover that the truck belonged to the very man in charge. The fallout? The HOA board in her new neighborhood banned her from any leadership positions permanently. I leaned back, shaking my head. Some people never learn. Tom sent one more text. Tom, so, you think she'll try again? I smirked. Me? Oh, definitely. But at least it's not our problem anymore. I set my phone down, still grinning, and turned to my computer. I had one final message for my audience. So what do you think? Did Linda get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments. And if you love watching entitled people get what's coming to them, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more crazy HOA stories, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Oh, and if you ever run into a Linda like this in your own HOA, just remember, they only have power if you let them. See you in the next story. Fade to black.